Hello again. So, as I said earlier, my name is Neil, and I'm going to talk you now through each of the units in the Teaching English for the Subject Classroom course. And I'm going to begin with Unit 1. The first of the units is Introduction, Starting and Finishing Lessons. So I'm now going to share the screen so that you can see the trainer's book. Each of the units starts with this at-a-glance guide to the unit itself, the overview, and the first thing on the overview is the workshop aim. So this unit is concerned with familiarizing participants with the course structure and objectives, and to introduce and practice vocabulary for common classroom objects and classroom expressions for starting and finishing lessons. You can see the next part are the learning outcomes. So we hope that the participants will be able to plan the start and end stages of their lessons, select and use appropriate language to start and end the different stages of their lessons. Next is the workshop outputs, and we are expecting the participants to have reflected on their learning and identified areas for further study, as well as they will have created an action plan for experimenting with ideas from this workshop. Key learning points is the next in the table, and this provides some of the rationale behind the workshop itself. We believe that using English in the classroom regularly will help the participants to improve their English and make them more confident. And the beginning and ends of lessons always provide opportunities for teachers and learners to communicate in English. And outlining and revising lessons both guides and maximizes learning. So if you tell the learners before what they are going to study and you repeat what they have covered at the end of the lesson, then that will help them to orient themselves and understand and remember what they have studied. In the next box in the table in the at-a-glance guide are some key language and phrases that we hope the teachers will feel more confident about using in their lessons. And then on the next page, you can see the plan of the session is broken down into its separate stages with approximate timings in the right-hand column. So the beginning of this session, it will begin with a getting to know you, an icebreaker, the aim of which is just to get the participants talking to each other and well, breaking the ice, getting to know each other in the simplest possible way. And this should take approximately 15 minutes. The second stage is the course overview and lead in, and this is aimed at familiarizing the participants with the course so that they will have an idea about what they're going to do over the whole week. Stage 3, classroom objects, and this is where the first real learning takes place. Approximately 20 minutes, you, the trainers, will introduce and practice vocabulary for common classroom objects. And stage 4, classroom language, and this you will remember that on the first page there was there we go. There's a table of functional classroom language and language for beginning and ending lessons. This is what we hope that the participants will take away and be more confident in using, and this is where you will introduce that. Stage 5, starting and finishing lessons. So this again is more classroom language that we hope that the participants can practice and become more comfortable using. Stage 6, starting a lesson. Stage 7, finishing the lesson. And then finally, a reflection and review. And so this is where we ask the participants to think about the workshop that they have just been through and write an action plan for themselves, so that they then take ownership of moving their own learning forward in the future. So that's what the first 2 pages of the trainer's notes look like. The following pages then have the actual detailed instructions about how you should organize and execute the training session. So, getting to know you icebreaker. You can see the stage aim is there, just to get everybody familiar with each other, comfortable in each other, with each other. The procedure is there in 4 bullet points. So it's suggested that you check understanding of any difficult vocabulary. So read through the cards before the session starts. Decide what words or phrases may be problematic that participants might not understand, and teach these before you hand out the cards. Stage 2, the next step in the procedure then is to elicit some examples of questions that participants will need to ask each other. So each of the participants will have a role card, and their partners, the people they talk to, will have to ask questions to elicit answers on their cards. So they will ask questions like, do you teach maths? How many languages can you speak? So it's your job to think of some questions that the participants will need to ask, and you can prepare them by putting some examples on the whiteboard. The next step is that you get the participants to mingle and ask questions. So everybody stands up, you move them into an open area, either inside the classroom or perhaps outside the classroom, and you ask them to walk around talking to as many people as possible, asking each other questions. And participants write a name next to the box when they get to the appropriate answer, and if the first participant to get a different name against each box is the winner, and should shout bingo. So those are the detailed instructions for the icebreaker in this first session, and they really are very detailed. If you read through it and visualize what it will be like in the training room when you're facing the participants, and how you're going to explain the activity, then it should be fairly straightforward. And perhaps you could think about showing the participants with you and one of the participants, so that they can see how this will work. So the next stage is the course overview and lead-in. This is 20-minute stage. You can see the procedure there broken down into 4 steps. They should work individually, using the scale to self-evaluate their ability in English. and then they compare in groups of 3. So this is the first of the group activities, group discussions. They will be doing a lot of this during the week. And it's important that they get into the habit of working comfortably in groups. The next step is a brief feedback, the whole group. It's not necessary to get feedback from every participant. It needs to be brief. You don't want to spend too much time on this, just to get a sample of 2, maximum 3 people, feedback from 3 people. Then the next step is that participants work in groups of 3 to discuss the questions. They will refer back to this at the end of the course to assess if their hopes have been met. So these are questions about what they hope to achieve on this course. And there are no correct answers to this. It's simply what the participants feel and what they envisage. Stage 3, classroom objects. The aim is to introduce and practice vocabulary for common classroom objects. There are 4 steps in the procedure. Section A, participants work in pairs to match vocabulary to the classroom objects. Go through the answers with the whole group and try to ensure that they are pronouncing the words correctly. So this could be a choral drill where you pronounce the word and get everybody to repeat the word. Stage 3, participants work in pairs to discuss which objects they have in their own classrooms. So you can follow this up with questions about what they have in their classrooms which are not mentioned. Some of the things in the list they will not have, but they will have things which are not in the list. So that could be a follow-up question. Next step in this procedure is to play the recording. Participants listen to identify which objects are mentioned and then compare answers. So it's a listening task. You will have the audio files. If there's any problem and you don't have the either the audio files or an audio visual hardware, then you can just read out the tape script. So participants listen and identify which objects are mentioned. Get them to compare their answers in pairs. You can play the recording again if they need it. Don't allow participants to shout the answers. It's very important. You want to give thinking space to the slower participants who may need a little bit more time. What we don't want is the more dominant participants to be shouting answers, because then that takes away an opportunity for everybody else to reflect. So this is a good moment for you to start that good habit of getting them to think quietly, no shouting. If anybody wants to offer an answer, they have to put their hand up and you choose the person who answers the question. Do not allow shouting of answers. Okay. The next stage, classroom language. This is to introduce useful classroom language expressions. Steps, 3 steps in the procedure. Give the participants 2 minutes to read through the dialogue quietly to themselves. They don't need to speak. They don't need to say it out loud. Then you play the recording. Participants listen and complete the gaps. Again, this should be a standard procedure. You get participants to compare answers in pairs before anybody suggests an answer, before anybody answers to the whole class. If they need to hear the recording again, play it again. Get them to compare their answers again. And only when everybody has had the chance to think and to compare their answer, then you ask the whole class for answers and ask them to put their hands up. Do not shout. Hands up. Who has the answer to number 1? Who has the answer to number 2, etc., etc. Here you have the audio script, so you can see this conversation. There are 5 more steps in the procedure here, and beneath the audio script it says, write the phrases on a classroom poster and put it on the training room wall for participants to refer to for the remainder of the course. This is a nice idea. You can get the participants to do this. You can get them to write the phrases and to create this classroom poster. There's a suggestion that you drill the phrases for pronunciation. So you model the phrases and you ask participants to repeat. Demonstrate the next activity with a strong participants to ensure that participants understand the aim of the activity. The next section is, in groups of 3, you hand out different pieces of subject information to each group. Participants take turns to read their information. The others practice using the phrases to check vocabulary and understanding. Okay, you can conduct feedback in a brief discussion, but make it brief. These whole class discussions can go on for a very long time. Whenever we do whole class discussions, there is inevitably only one person talking at any one time, and everybody else is listening to that person. So it can be something of a waste of time. So try to make this as brief as possible. Stage 5, starting and finishing lessons. You will introduce phrases for teachers to use at different stages of a lesson. Under the procedure, this is a 25-minute exercise. Section A, participants work in pairs to match the verbs to the nouns. You have the answers there. Revise a lesson, greet a learner, take the register, etc. Section B, participants work individually to complete the questionnaire and then they compare in small groups. So this again is a habit that you want your participants to get into. They work individually. When you tell them work in pairs, they should cooperate with their partner. When you tell them to work individually, they should work quietly on their own. After that, they can compare in their groups. Again, a brief feedback, whole group feedback, but make it very brief, very brief. Section C, participants work in pairs to match the phrases with the functions. Okay, so this is now a pair work. Make sure that you tell participants who they're going to work with, put them into pairs, and tell them you're going to work together to match these phrases with the functions. The next stage of this session is starting a lesson. The aim is to introduce practice and personalized phrases for teachers to use at the start of a lesson. So you're introducing language that teachers commonly use at the beginning of a class. There are 4 steps in the procedure for this 20-minute exercise. Give participants 2 minutes to read through the action. So they should be reading silently, individually, read through the actions. Then play the recording. Participants listen and identify the actions the teacher does, and they need to number them in the correct order. Again, repeating the same, the habit that you began earlier, you ask the participants to compare answers in pairs. Do not allow them to shout out answers. tell them it's very important they compare answers in pairs before sharing their answers with the entire group. This is good advice for when they go back into their own classrooms. This is something that they should be doing with the children in their classes. After they've compared answers, you can play the recording again if you feel it is necessary, and then go through the answers with the whole group. And you have the answers there in blue. So number 1, greet the class. Number 2, ask a learner to open the window. Number 3, take the register, etc. So next step, participants listen again and write the phrases the teacher uses for each action, and then they compare answers in pairs. You can play the recording again if it is necessary, and then go through the answers with the whole group and drill the pronunciation. So get them to repeat. You model, they repeat. Good morning, everyone. Repeat. Good morning, everyone. Next step, participants work individually to think of a recent lesson they have taught and prepare the start of it. So you want them to make notes, not to write a script. You don't want them to write exactly every single word that they would use, but just to think about how they would prepare the beginning of a lesson. And put them into groups. Ask them to take turns practicing the start of their lesson. You can do a whole group discussion. The lessons, the questions that you could get them to discuss are in the blue box there. Why is it important to have a clear start? How does it help learners? Can participants establish a routine of starting lessons in English? So this is not a feedback where teachers give answers to questions. This is a discussion where teachers are actually learning from each other's opinions and experiences. So this kind of whole group discussion, I think, is more worth investing time in. So you might want to spend a little more time on this than you would in a question and answer feedback. The next stage of this unit is finishing a lesson. They are going to introduce, practice, and personalize phrases for teachers to use at the end of a lesson. So you have already done the starting a lesson. Now we're looking at finishing a lesson. The procedure there are 6 steps in this procedure. It should take 20 minutes. So section A, books closed. So everybody close your books, listen to this recording of the end of a lesson, and identify what the subject is. What is the subject of this lesson? Close your books, listen, and think about what was the lesson about. The answer is maths. The next step, give participants a minute to look at the 4 different blackboards. Participants listen again to and identify which of these 4 blackboards is the one in the recording. The answer is B. Again, don't allow participants to shout out their answers. Don't allow them to shout out their ideas. You want everybody to have time to think and reflect. Section B, give participants 2 minutes to read through the dialogue. They should do this quietly. And then play the recording. Participants listen to complete the gaps and then compare their answers in groups. So it's a gap fill task, and you can, as per usual procedure, get them to compare their answers in pairs. You can play the recording again if you think it is necessary, and only then go through the answers with the whole group. Once more, drill pronunciation of these phrases. So you model the phrase and ask them to repeat. Next stage, get the participants to work in pairs to match the phrases with the functions. So this is the same as they did earlier when you were looking at starting a lesson. Now it's the same procedure in the exercise for ending a lesson. Once again, they should work individually, think of a recent lesson they've taught, and prepare the ending. Same procedure in groups of 4 participants. Take turns to practice the ending of their lesson. And once again, conduct a brief whole group discussion around these questions. Why is it important to have a clear end to a lesson? How does it help learners? Can participants establish a routine of finishing lessons in English? So you might want to devote 5, perhaps even 10 minutes to this whole group discussion, but certainly no more than 10 minutes. And finally, the reflection and review. Now, this is where you want participants to sit quietly, work quietly, individually, recording useful language in their notebooks, and completing their personal action plan. You might want to finish this session by asking, so what did we do today? And tell them what they're going to do in the next workshop, and that will be about presenting lesson content. Okay, so in the trainer manual, at the end of the session notes, you will find the appendix, which is where you will find the resources that you need for this session. So here there are some cut-ups. You'll need to make enough of these for the number of participants you have and cut them up before the lesson starts, the session starts. And so at the end of every one of these units, you will find the resources that you need for that unit. So check that before anything. Look at the resources that you need for every unit. Okay, and that concludes the first of these units.